member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, the subcommittee continues its oversight work on the Toxic Substances Control Act, tackling two important and related issues: EPA's authority to regulate harmful chemicals and the ability of states to take action when necessary. EPA's regulation of chemicals can be an important part of protecting families from harmful environmental exposures and pollution. Unfortunately, TSCA has so far fallen short of its objectives. Its failures have meant avoidable suffering, disease, and death. Asbestos is one of the clearest examples. Over the course of 10 years, EPA undertook a rulemaking and built an exhaustive record in an attempt to regulate this dangerous toxin. But the court threw it out, and essentially EPA gave up hope of using TSCA to address chemical risks. Mr. Rawson, you suggested in your testimony that you agree with the court's decision to throw out EPA's asbestos rule. Specifically, Mr. Rawson seems to argue that the automobile brake pads should remain on the market unless EPA can prove that brake pads not containing asbestos are safe to use. Ms. Reinstein, you know firsthand the terrible suffering associated with exposure to asbestos. And what can you tell us about the health risks posed by exposure to asbestos from brake pads?
Thank you, Ranking Member Waxman, and you're also my congressman, so it's lovely to finally meet you in person. We know that asbestos is a carcinogen causing disability and deaths. I can only tell you that those who are diagnosed with these diseases and their entire families suffer. We have many asbestos victims who have changed brakes and have inhaled and have obviously been exposed to asbestos. And again, the latency period complicates it. There is no cure for any of these diseases. However, prevention is a cure.
In your view, if Congress were to consider TSCA reform legislation, should we ensure that EPA be able to put an end to the ongoing asbestos exposures in this nation?
I think that if there is a bill passed that can't do that, it needs to go back to the woodshed. Clearly, any TSCA reform must ban asbestos.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, you represent 12 major automobile manufacturers. Do your manufacturers still use asbestos brake pads and linings on new cars?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Do you or your members have concerns about the safety of non-asbestos brake pads?
I'm sorry, repeat that question one more time.
Do you or your members have concerns about the safety of non-asbestos brake pads?
No.
But my understanding is that brake pads containing asbestos remain on the market today. Asbestos can still be found in imported brake pads sold in the aftermarket. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is my understanding.
Now, Mr. Rawson, I'd like to go back to you. Let's put aside whether the court decided the asbestos case correctly or EPA built the best record it could over the course of its 10-year effort. Do you think that this was a good policy outcome? Do you believe it was good for the public for asbestos to remain on the market? Public health advocates and state regulators remain concerned about asbestos in brake pads. For example, some states, including California, have passed bans on asbestos brake pads.
Thank you for the question. First of all, I obviously don't take lightly the hazards of asbestos and share the sympathies of everybody in this room for all families who've suffered losses as a result. So I take that as seriously as everybody else. At the time of the rulemaking, new cars were already not using asbestos on brake pads.
Well, what do you think the policy ought to be? Do you think it was a good policy outcome?
Yeah, I'm trying to answer that.
Well, do it very quickly because my time's running out.
The issue was with replacement brakes using a non-asbestos brake pad on a car engineered for a brake pad could cause many more deaths than it would prevent. An EPA study said that. An EPA expert said that the loss of life from putting the wrong brake pad on the car would far outweigh any benefit of the rule. Okay. And the problem was EPA didn't answer that. Had they answered that...
Let me ask Mr. Sorolovic, how important is it to maintain the ability of states to take actions like that to address health risks from chemicals when EPA can't? It's an important issue. I can't support legislation that would undermine the few protections that are in current law or that would preempts successful state efforts to protect the public. What do you think?
Congressman, I think it's very important to preserve the traditional power of states to take legislative, regulatory action under their traditional powers to protect their citizens and their environment from the hazards posed by toxic chemicals.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. I'm sorry to have cut you off, but my time is already over, and I have to yield back to the chairman to call another member.
And he knows how tough I am on time, so I thank the